Hello everyone, I'm delighted to be here. First time attendee and first time presenter. I think I had to actually nominate myself to present to get a ticket at this event, such as the popularity of it internally in our company Fivetran. And I'm sure it speaks to the fact that this is a great event today. I'm sure you heard a lot of speakers talking about all these new tools and processes that you might need to adopt as part of your team, and also like maybe new data roles that you need to hire for. But I'm here to round up the day on the bit of the graveyard slot on now that you have begun that journey or you're about to begin that journey on investing in your modern data stack. How do you make sure you actually get return on investment from your investment? And it's obviously been a pretty timely topic to discuss this at the moment, given the macroeconomic situation we find ourselves in. But actually for the data industry, it's kind of an ever-present topic. I mean, we've always had to, as a data team, justify the value that we bring to the business, which is a topic for a whole other day. But so far as to say, this is always something that will be relevant to any data team and any company that has a data team. But before I get into illustrating how you might do this, I better introduce myself. So my name is Niamh. I lead one of the solution architecture and implementation teams here at Fivetran, and I really enjoy it. The data integration industry is a really interesting vantage point to look at all of the changes that happen, all of the new architecture patterns, because you're kind of in the heart of everything that's going on in that data lifecycle journey. Before I joined Fivetran, I specialised in fraud analytics and did some of the largest enterprise implementations across a number of banks across Europe. That was more about maximising other people's investments in fraudulent and detecting fraudulent activity, and a bit of a different topic that we're going to discuss today. But let me get into it. So when we talk about maximising our investment, we're really talking about how do we make it successful, right? And so let me just start with what doesn't necessarily guarantee success. So as I said, you probably had a few talks about it today across different areas, but investment in data tools alone does not equal success. Investment in data specialists does not equal success. Even a combination of the two, if you thought that was what's coming next to my slide, does not equal success. But that's enough about what doesn't equal success, because you're here to hear quite the opposite of that. And so we're going to talk about what does success look like. Not this slide, because it looks like a very half-finished slide right now, but I do promise by the end of this presentation it will actually be filled with the 4 critical elements that I believe are important in order to maximise the investment that you've made in your modern data stack and to make it successful. And whilst on the previous slide I've just talked about how these 2 attributes alone do not represent success, they do need to be successful in and of themselves. And data tooling, I'm going to start with data tooling, and that's really the cornerstone of how you build your success. Thankfully, from your perspective, there's a lot of considerations that you need to take into account when considering tools. I am not going to go into all of them today. I'm sure you've heard about many of them. There are 2 attributes in particular that I do want to focus on, and they are scalability and automation. And why these 2 attributes? Well, because these 2 attributes, in my opinion, enable business agility. And business agility has become very, very important in recent months, because it enables business continuity and allows businesses to remain successful. Scalability is really important in this context. Maybe not so much in the traditional way that we've been discussing it for many years in the data industry. It's not always just about scaling up. It's also about being able to scale down to react to changes in the market. And that's what we really mean by business agility. It is not just about scaling up to those large volumes in an ever increasing amount. You also need to be able to have the flexibility in your data tools to be able to scale down when required. Then secondly, automation. If you have a data team that's primarily focused on just keeping the lights on, that data team can't actually spend as much time reacting to, again, business changes. They cannot spend the time predicting changes that might happen to the business. And so instead of just becoming data providers to the business, if your team doesn't have to focus on automation, they can actually become trusted advisors to your business partners instead of just being, or trusted advisors instead of just being providers of data. So leveraging these two attributes and ensuring your data tools have these two attributes will be important for the success of your data infrastructure. So what could such a scalable and automated data structure look like? So I'm going to take you through a bit of a reference data platform architecture with a slightly unusual analogy, or maybe somebody's already done it before. But essentially, it starts with data sources. And what this represents is just untapped value, essentially. These are, if you just think of data sources as essentially raw materials in a manufacturing process, these raw materials need to be transported, they need to be stored securely, they need to be processed and transformed in order to actually provide business value. Essentially, they need to become a product, like in any kind of manufacturing flow. And so they need to go through all of these steps to get to the end point, which is the business value. And so with any asset that we have or any raw material, it needs to be handled with care. And so when you're transporting that data, you need something that is, guess what, automated, scalable, and I'll throw in secure and reliable there as well. And that's where Fivetran comes in. So it really just takes all of those very, very high value raw materials and securely transports those, moves those into a destination, which thankfully the naming conventions of the modern data stack are really helping with my analogy here. So the raw materials are then transported to a warehouse, such as a cloud data warehouse. And this is really a purpose-built location to store this type of raw material. It has the space and it has the machine power to be able to store securely this data and also be able to transform it and combine it and ultimately create a product. So this is now essentially our data product right here, and it's ready to be consumed by the business in order to be able to realize business value. So what we have here is, because of all of the work that's gone into this raw material to create this product, we have a product that our data teams can trust. We have data that they trust that when they put it into a dashboard for a business user to be able to make a decision on it, they can trust it because they know it's been transported securely, they know it's stored securely, and they can see the lineage of all of that data through this modern data architecture. They also can have confidence that the data that they feed into their AI tools, somebody here is definitely like taking a clicker of how many times AI is mentioned today, so I just said I'd throw it in there, given it's extremely topical. But they now have the confidence that that data that they're putting into their AI tools is actually of good quality and therefore might actually generate some insights that are usable and trustable by the business. And so I spent a lot of time talking about how this enables trust within the data team. And that's because if you remember our half-finished diagram from earlier, the other cornerstone of our diagram was the data team and the expertise that you have. So who is the data team and what kind of roles do we need on that team? So I've rather flippantly included quite a long list on the technical side of data roles that you might need in your team. There's been an explosion of different data roles in recent years. Certainly when I started in data anyway, the analytics engineer title didn't exist, and I probably would be one right now if it had, to be honest. But you don't necessarily need every single type of these roles. What I would encourage you to do is actually to look at the skill set of your team, but not to look at the skill set of your team in isolation. Look at the skill set of your team in combination with the data tools that you have. Because if you have good data tools, modern data tools, they can actually be an extension of the skill sets of your data team. So, for example, the inverse of that would be is if you have some legacy software in your data stack, you might have to have a very, very specialist role here just to maintain that legacy software. And that person cannot actually contribute to, let's say, any of the AI or ML projects that you have going on, because their sole focus has to be this maintenance of this legacy software. Whereas, let's just take Fivetran, for example, it's quite easy. That means that your data engineers don't necessarily need to focus on maintenance of pipelines, which, to be honest, probably doesn't really get that many data engineers out of bed in the morning. They probably want to be doing more interesting problems that are actually unique to whatever business that they exist in. Building another Salesforce connector for the world probably isn't the most interesting thing for a data engineer to be working on. So, takeaway here is you don't need all of these different roles within your team, but definitely evaluate the roles that you have in your team alongside the tool set that you have, because one will heavily influence the other if you've invested in the right tools. The second half of this screen is the other roles that you definitely need within your data team. And I call these roles just the data translators. It's what a lot of people call them. There hasn't been, maybe I've missed some off the list, but there hasn't been quite the explosion in titles in this area. Maybe I could have also included data evangelist in here. And I'm not going to read too much into that. I hope it's not because people don't realize the value that these roles bring, because you can have the best data stack in the world. If you don't have people to bring it to the business and to translate that value to the business and overlay that business context to that data, no one is going to use it, and it certainly won't represent good value. So what if you're sitting here and we're however many minutes through this presentation and you're saying, well, Niamh, I have a really good data stack, I have a really good data team, but our data teams internally are still kind of struggling to deliver on the promise of our data. We still get people internally in our business coming up to us being like, don't really know what the data team does, would love to know more, would love to see your impact on the data, impact on the business, how do you measure that? And that's primarily the number one reason I've seen for data teams not having the impact they would like to have on the business, is because of bottlenecks. Now, hopefully this isn't a representation of anybody's commute to the conference this morning, but what it does represent is that bottleneck issue that I have come across many, many times in my career, probably the most common issue, whereby essentially you've built, it's off screen, but you've built this amazing motorway which represents your data stack in this context. But what you've done is you've stuck loads and loads of toll booths on that motorway. And those toll booths are actually like a blocker to the business. So in order to get through the toll booth, you have to actually raise a JIRA ticket to get access to the analytics team, raise a JIRA ticket to get access to X, Y, and Z data. And so what that results in is this creation of this bottleneck and people not having access to the data that they need. So what you've done is essentially put up barriers to people accessing the motorway, which is actually the most efficient way for them to get from A to B. And you're also, these people back here, you're really just encouraging them to put it in reverse and to find another route. But as we know, motorways are built for a reason, to be efficient. And so if they're going around back roads, that's probably very inefficient. And, you know, to bring it back to data, if they're going into reverse, they're probably going back into Excel. They're going to do the data analysis themselves. Is it up to date? Is it fresh? Is it version controlled? Absolutely not. And that's why people struggle to understand sometimes the impact of their internal data teams, because they simply can't access them and they're being forced away. So how do we overcome this problem? What we should really have here is, you know, a couple of fast lanes on the right-hand side for those power users or data fluent users that we have in the business, and they essentially get a toll pass so that they can go on the motorway. These are people that we know the rules of the road, know the right lanes to be in, and they should be able to access the data as quickly as possible. how do we ensure that there's not just a couple of people, a couple of power users in the organization, maybe ex-data analysts themselves? Like, there's a lot of cars here. You know, one lane with fast pass where 10 people can go through is not going to solve the problem. And so the third critical element to create a successful modern data stack is actually data fluency. Because at the end of the day, you will give access to people that you trust. You trust that they have the skill sets. You trust that they know the rules of the road. And how do you teach them the rules of the road? Well, in the data context, you have to have data fluency training. It is absolutely vital that you have data fluency training for any decision makers outside of your data team in your organization, because they have to be able to do some level of, you have to be able to give some level of access with control to these people. So I think I might have come to the end of the road of that analogy. Puns and analogies is a recipe not made in heaven, so you'll be happy to hear that we're now on to our final attribute of success from my perspective, which is data democratization. And you'll understand why it's in the middle in a second, because it really is absolutely central. Data fluency and data democratization go hand in hand, because in order to have an engaging data fluency program, you have to give people access to data. If you're running a data fluency training and it's on a sample data set, it's not going to be valuable. People aren't going to walk away being terribly inspired. What you need to do is make it tangible. So when you're doing your data fluency training, you need to give them access to data that is relevant to their team or their department, and data that they can access tomorrow and the day after, and after that training, and other data sets after that training that they combine with that data set. Because if you really want to do data democratization and data fluency, you have to get that level of engagement. Just think about how many times you try to explain AI to someone, and until they literally took out their phone, went on ChatGPT themselves, asked a question that they care about, that's the only time they actually had that realization moment of, okay, I get this. And you need to try and create that in your data fluency training as well internally. You need to be able to make it tangible and get that value realization with everyone who takes that training. Now, for those of you, which, to be honest, sometimes myself, had a very visceral reaction to hearing the word data democratization, and we're very worried about what does this mean for my data governance framework, no fear. There are very loose definitions of data democratization out there. I don't like loose data definitions of data democratization. The definition that I like, or how I like to think about data democratization, is that it's about having a data literate workforce with the right access to the right data. And that's it. No more. It's not a free-for-all data buffet where you can get access to anything you might want or you might need. It really is just as simple as this, and works in tandem with your data governance strategy. Because in my view, they have a very symbiotic relationship. Data democratization needs a data governance framework. It's dependent on a robust and value-driven data governance framework. And in turn, data governance definitely needs data democratization, because what this does, it ties data governance to business value. Which is something that many organizations struggle with. The amount of people I talk to and say, I'm very passionate about data governance, but no one in my organization is. And those are organizations that should be using data democratization as actually a way to connect with the business and associate themselves with business value. So if you're not already moving towards a more modern construct for data governance, you really should be. Everyone should really be moving away from this compliance-driven mindset around data governance to more of a value-driven mindset. Because gone are the days, thankfully, of command and control data governance frameworks where we're putting up barriers between people and data and people and access. And now governance is actually more seen as a competitive advantage. And we're moving more towards control without constraint. So this is basically saying, ensure your team has access to everything they need and nothing that they don't. And that protects your most valuable assets, i.e. your data, but also allows people to be able to use your most valuable assets, which is obviously your data. So hopefully we've answered what success looks like in terms of the 4 critical attributes that you need to maximize the investment that you've made in your people, your process, and your technology. If you're struggling to remember anything from this presentation besides me talking about roads and raw materials, then just remember this one key takeaway. The only way to realize value from data is to allow people to use it. So let the data be used. That's it. I was pretty efficient because I wanted to let people see if they wanted to go for beers, but there is also time for questions. So if anybody does have questions, I'm happy to take them.